Hello and welcome to the first in a small series of videos dedicated completely to cavity maps in Blender. How do we create them? How do we use them? Where do we get them from? What the heck are they? On the Polycount wiki, it's a good site, it's been around forever. A cavity map is a texture that stores small-scale ambient occlusion, also called a crevice map. Cavity map is different from curvature map, which stores the convexity and concavity of a mesh. To bake a cavity map, use ambient occlusion with the ray distance set to a lower value. This is a good clue as to how in the heck we create the cavity maps. Of course, like I said, in Blender. What we're going to do, I'm going to demonstrate using a model that I acquired from Open Game Art. The author was Quantum. You can see here, let me zoom in a second and you can get a good idea who it is and what to look for. Alright. The only thing I've done to the file was hide the irrelevant things, you know, the animation helpers and stuff, and I changed the background from a green to a gray in our render settings. Alright, let's get on with it. First things first, we got to make sure that we have a new blank material assigned to our mesh, or you can reuse your old one if you want. I mean, that's beyond the scope of this. We're going to change our render settings here in this tab to cycles, and you can leave it on CPU. I'm going to switch to GPU for sake of time, but this works well with CPU as well. The first shading, and alright, first things first, you want to switch to shading, okay, and you're going to make sure that you have the rendered little tab here pressed in the viewport shading. Generally when you switch over, it'll go to the, what is this, the material preview, but we need cycles to be working while we do this. Alright, we have our model. The first thing I'm going to show you is what I found initially on the internet as far as creating a cavity map in Blender. Alright, we're going to need an emission shader, which will be plugged into the surface portion of the material output. We are also going to need a geometry node, and we are going to need a color ramp node. Optional but useful is a gamma node. Okay, this is all it takes, according to the internet, from what I found, to create your cavity map. I will tell you this, it works well on high poly meshes. Sculpting, you know, when you're trying to bake out your cavity map from sculpts, things of that nature. But anyway, what we're going to do is we're going to connect the pointiness, we're going to connect pointiness to the color ramp, the input on the color ramp, the color from the color ramp to the color input on gamma, the color to color. And as you can see, we're starting to see some results here. What we're going to want to do with the color ramp is we'll take the black slider and we're going to position that at 0.4, and the white slider we're going to position that at 0.6. That gives us starting to look okay. That would be an alright ambient occlusion map. We have a smidge of an artifact there that I don't believe I would like. But if we go to the solid display and in the options check cavity, that is what I would expect the first time I made a cavity map, to be able to adjust out from there. That's not what we got. Now to be fair, there are other tweaks and settings and so on and so forth for this, and I'm going to show you how to get close to this using this. We'll go back here, and in our mesh we can of course adjust our sliders in an effort to get it closer. Let's set those back. We'll choose the white one, put it back to 0.6, and we will add a center gray, and we should be able to get a little more out of that by bringing that up. It's a little closer, but still not quite what we want. So we'll set the gray back to 0.5. What we need to do, the geometry node, the pointiness works best with a high poly mesh, like I said. So we'll add a subdivision surface, bring it up above the edge split, and it is going to take 4. Alright, we have 800,000, 900,000 about faces. We'll set the gamma to 0.2. Oh, not 0.2, just a 2.2. My bad. We're getting close here. Change that to flat so we can see it better. Go back to here. Turn off the scene lights. And that's kind of close. Alright. Is our artifact still there? Yeah, it's still a little bit there. But that's okay, and of course we can adjust out the depth and the brightness of each channel, the black, the white, and the gray point using our sliders here. We're going to put those back to where they initially go. Just remember 0.4, 0.5, and 0.6. Black, gray, and white. Alright. That increases the memory. If we look here, our memory goes from 169 megabytes using this technique. Give it a moment. It jumps up to 844 megabytes of memory used on this in order to get this result. So that's not great. What if you have a low-end machine, you've got 4 gigabytes of memory, 8 gigabytes of memory. I have an i5 processor, and I've got 24 gigabytes of memory, so it's not too big of a deal, but I still like things to be snappy. So we're going to get rid of the subdivision modifier, and we will take, actually, yeah, we're going to use all these, and we're going to replace the geometry node altogether. We'll leave everything else the same, and instead of the geometry node, we're going to add in 2 ambient occlusion nodes. Let me drag this up here to where we can see what we're doing. I'll drag in one, Shift D, bring it down, and invert, a color invert node, and a mix RGB node. We'll take the ambient occlusion from the top ambient occlusion and attach it to the invert, bring it down to the top color, and we'll bring the mix shader to the color ramp. And we'll take the ambient occlusion output from the bottom ambient occlusion node and we'll put it to the color 2. Now let's see here for reference. In our solid viewport, this is what the cavity map option gives us, and I like that. That is a good starting point. So we're going to let me stop right there. This top ambient occlusion node controls the white, the outside edges that you see, and the bottom one controls the black. So what we're going to do is we're going to leave the top one, the color, we're going to leave that alone, and we're going to change the bottom one to black. This doesn't affect the output of the node, for us anyway. But this makes it easier for us to adjust things and go exactly to where we want. So for the top one, which will be for white, let's go back into our render here. We're going to change that to 0.015. Alright, and then the bottom one, we will do the same, 0.015. And after we do that, oh yeah, the top one, my bad, you need to check inside. There we go. Now, we still have a low poly mesh, but we've acquired a pretty darn, actually it's a little aggressive, but a pretty darn close approximation of what we had in the solid here. Now to recap, the difference is, instead of using a geometry node, we're using two ambient occlusions. The top one controls the white that we see here. The bottom one controls the black. So bottom one's innie, top one's outie. The distance is 0.015 for both. The one that controls the white, we want it to get the ambient occlusion from the inside. So rather than inverting the normals on your mesh, you just click inside and there you go. The top one we connect to an invert. We connect both of them to a mix shader, the mix RGB, and from there to the color ramp. And from then on out, it's the same as everybody else. Now, this is a bit harsh. I want to be able to use this to mix materials together so that I can I can show wear and stuff like that on the edges. We control the thickness of our lines here, the black and the white, with the distance. Okay, now the black, we want to have that a little, give it a little more gradient, so we're going to go 0.05 on that. And that makes it a little wider. We come over here to the color ramp, we'll drag it back, and that starts looking a little more like we want. And then here on the top, we'll go 0.025. That makes it a little thicker. We'll drag the white up to about 0.75, and then we can adjust our gray to where we need it. And that gives us a little more gradient there to work with that we can mix with a another map later on. Now we'll go ahead and set everything back to default, and or back to where we had it originally. 0.5, 0.4, 0.5, and 0.6. 4, 5, 6 on the color ramp. 0.015 on the ambient occlusion nodes. Alright, this is quite pretty. It's all fine and dandy. But how do we get at it? We need to bake it. Now here is something that I found out. It works for me. We need to add a texture node, an image texture node in here. Doesn't need to be attached to anything. It just needs to be in the material. We go new, we'll leave it at default settings, except we're going to call it cavity. Click on OK, and go to UV editing or texture paint, either or. We'll choose it, and we need to save it out. Save as image. Okay. Now we can go back into shading. We have it in here. We're going to want to be somewhere where we can pay attention. We're going to come over here to our render settings. We will go down to the bake option, and the bake type, we are going to change that to emission. As long as we have our object selected here, that is all we have to do. We'll click on bake, give it a moment. I do have this on GPU for cycles. On CPU it does take quite a bit longer, and voila, that is actually kind of pretty. Now we'll take our image, we'll save it, and we'll go back into our shading. We need to add a UV map input. Click on that, choose our UV map, and let's see how good our map looks. Looks identical. Now from there, you can use this map to start mixing meshes, mixing materials together with a mix shader, mixing your different textures together. But this is how to get a good cavity map, and like I said, this is just an extreme example. You adjust out the thicknesses down here. Top one controls the white, bottom one controls the black, and yeah, have fun, play around with it. In the next video, I'm going to show you how to get make a cavity map from a normal map in the shading editor where we are now. It's not that difficult. It's a bit much, but it's not too bad. And using that along with what we've just done today, you can create some really awesome cavity maps for use on your models that you've acquired from, say, Quixel, or somewhere else that they had already done the sculpting, they baked it out, retopoed, and they gave it to you, and you're not happy with the cavity map. You want to change the materials, you want to be able to work with it more, but you don't have access to the high poly map or high poly model. But anyway, like I said, have fun, be prepared for the next one. It will it'll be kind of cool. Plenty of things to play with here. Hopefully this has helped you out, and this is Angelo. Have a good day.